Hi there. We'd like to welcome you to the virtual kitchen table. We are Erin from Everlearning, Haley from Taking a Kinder Path, and myself, Ashley from Ashley as Mama and Storytime Shelves. We're gathering to have conversations about family life and home education, most specifically unschooling, which is sometimes known as self-directed education, or as I often refer to it, consent-based learning. We'll be sharing experiences and ideas, learning as we go. We hope you'll pull a chair up to the table and join us.
Kind of reminds me of the idea of like you're building in grace. Kind of you're building in the assumption that it's not always going to be perfect. It reminds me of Missy's quote from the beginning and that idea of humility that it brought up for me. It's like we're all working on this together. We don't have all the answers, but we're on the same team. Right? We're partnering, we're working together. I wondered, I had a couple of Peter Gray quotes. And so one of them is about, I guess, some science around brains and gaming. And the other one is something that I think I hear a lot about is emotional regulation and people just feeling their kids are very dysregulated after gaming. And I just have to admit, Peter Gray obviously has a particular opinion on this. So as far as the quotes that I kind of looked at, there's probably some confirmation bias going on here because I know there's loads of articles that say the opposite. So, but I also think those aren't hard to find. There are a lot of warnings, to parents about screens and gaming. So in a way, maybe this just kind of offers another perspective. So Dr. Gray says, most of the video gaming research to date has focused on cognition. Correlational studies have consistently revealed that young people who play video games extensively have, on average, higher IQs and perform better on a wide variety of cognitive tests of perceptual and mental ability than do non-gamers. Moreover, a number of experiments have demonstrated improvement in previous non-gamers' cognitive abilities when they take up gaming for the sake of the experiment. And that is a piece of writing he did from Benefits of Play Revealed in Research on Video Gaming. Now, I feel like that would be kind of a hot button to hear for a lot of people because I don't think people think about it that way. The idea that kids might perform better if they game or better in certain areas. Like, I think that's the other thing we have to think about. There's so many different ways of learning and doing things, but certainly in some areas, there's been this finding, and I have to say that that's my experience. When I do things with my kids, it is very, very clear to me that there's a part of their brain that is developed that is not developed in mine. And even aside from gaming, it just even happens with all kinds of technology. My kids help me with almost everything that I do with technology. There's just something, there's something there as far as their reaction time, to the point that if we play games where it's a real strength of mine, like let's say a word game, I almost never win. Because there's just something there as far as their reaction time, their perception. So I feel like that's a bit of a controversial quote of his, but I would say my experience is in line with that, that gaming really does help develop certain parts of the brain. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that or experience based on what you've perceived with your kids or sort of observed?
My guys are so young, so I think I do predict that I will I will see that happening, and I do notice now. For a good few years now, I'll pick up on little things, or I'll even ask how do you know that, or where did you learn that, or kind of I'm thinking where did you pick up that skill or practice that, and I can either if they don't tell me, oh, YouTube or Minecraft or what, because they know. They just learn so much from all that stuff and they can tell me. But because I'm with them so often, if I notice it and then I think what have you been playing lately? And I'm like, oh, I bet you that's where you got that from. So I do think that will continue as they get older.
It's an interesting way to gain knowledge and integrate knowledge too, because I think we talked about this before, I think when we were talking about joy and flow, that when kids are in a place of joy or they're in a place of flow, they're just, those pieces of information are just so accessible to them, and are stored, I think, on a much deeper level in their mind. So I've had those experiences a lot too, where my kids will be talking about something or they'll know about something, and I'll think, where would you have picked that up? And so often it has been, a game or something online that, I guess back to that idea I often have, like, not everything they know was something I introduced them to. And that's kind of like an ego thing over time, where I started to realize how many different things they were integrating and picking up. The other piece that I find really interesting, actually, because this is a really common thing that I hear, is just kids being overloaded, or parents' perception that kids are overloaded after either gaming a long time or playing a particular type of game. And that could totally be the case. But just to offer kind of another way of looking at it. So Dr. Gray says, but research supporting the emotional regulation theory indicates that a major purpose of play, so he's including video game play in play, a major purpose of play is to provide practice at dealing with fear and anger in the relatively safe context of play. In play, children learn that they can experience these emotions and can subsequently calm themselves. So is it the idea that we see kids getting really revved and fired up, maybe arguing with one another, like depending on the situation, and that's really uncomfortable for us? But is that part of them playing with those big emotions and playing with disappointment? I don't know, but that's what comes to mind when I read his quote about that is, they're in a safe environment, and is this the space for them to practice with those big emotions? And yet I think, again, this might be one of those conversations where it depends on the family. And it depends if you have a parent working a shift who's trying to get some sleep. Like, that's again where we have all those nuances, I think, that come into play.
I missed a little bit of what you said, Erin. I'm sorry. It was kind of cutting out a little bit, but it was related to the research and what Peter Gray was saying. My take after reading research and even taking all that into consideration is that I think anything that we do can be used in a way to check out of society, or to check out of our feelings, or to check out of dealing with something. And so for me, I feel like if it comes to our kids going to play a game or gaming for excessive amounts of time, or being on their screens for excessive amounts of time, and they're not dealing with things that they need to deal with, or they're not taking care of themselves, hygiene is falling behind, or, all the things that they do actually care about are somehow getting pushed to the side, then maybe there's a question to ask if there's something else deeper going on. So I feel like gaming in and of itself is not necessarily disorder. It's a matter of what's underneath all of it. So is it being used in place because they're trying to avoid something? I guess that's one thing I would just toss out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Missy. And I think too, I wonder if there's a, if you're kind of observing your child, is there a point, like maybe there are times that even as adults, we're not quite ready to deal with something. And so even checking out can be okay, as long as it's okay, if that makes sense. Like for myself, sometimes I will have times where I will check out into something online, or, there's the whole thing about people binge watching a series or whatever, and you're not really ready to deal with it, but you just need a little bit of, your system needs to zone out a little bit. And then I think that's where, if we're partnering with our kids and we're observing, we can kind of be watching, where is that threshold where it would be useful to have that conversation with them or offer something else. Yeah, I think so too. I think it's and Ashley, to your point about it being a lot of work, those are the pieces that I think are a lot of work, right? Because if we're not parenting in these blanket statement ways, this is the rule because this is how I grew up, or this is what the magazine says or whatever, it does require a lot more observing and listening. And kind of figuring those things out.
Yeah. And I think, go ahead, Haley.
I was just going to say about it being an ongoing conversation. If we've laid those foundations of trust and respect, and we've shown that we're willing to listen to our kids when they want to tell us about the games that they're playing, and that we've shown an interest and we've shown that we actually care, and we've got that foundation, then that ongoing conversation is a lot easier, and it's much easier for our kids to come to us with things that they're feeling, more negative stuff, I guess, rather than having to feel like they've got to continually persuade us that screens are okay. They can actually be open and honest, and if they feel if they feel that there's an issue and that maybe they're playing too much and it's making them feel rubbish, then they'll be able to come to us if we've got that kind of foundation and the conversation is more open like that, rather than it being if we're all about saying, if we're trying to persuade them how bad it is and they're trying to persuade us how good it is, then you've got to kind of wonder how honest our conversations can be, really, and how willing they might be to come to us if they've got a problem. And what we want is for our kids to be able to come to us for support, don't we? To be their safe space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I have like acquaintances and friends that I know have made that choice to just stop the video games or say, we're going to take a big break from television, and we're just going to have movie nights, or we're going, they try all these different things, but it's like removing, right? Like they're just, I think this is the problem, too much TV or the video game, we're just going to remove it. And I know from hearing from others that when it gets reintroduced, like the challenges return. So I think it can be like quick and easy to just kind of blame, it must be the games that you're playing, right? But I don't think it ever really is, from my experience yet anyway. And one thing when you guys were talking, I was thinking about, and I hear other parents concerned about this too, maybe more so when the kids are younger, I'm not sure. But I can see it with my two. So again, they're 9 and 7. And while they're playing more so like games where they're battling and there's like a clear winning team, losing team, big emotions are involved. And it can be kind of, I remember early on feeling a bit concerned with like hearing the emotions that were happening, the frustration, the anger, the upset, and being like, oh gosh, right? This seems like a lot. What good could this be doing, right? It still happens, but now I'm much more comfortable with it, because one thing I've noticed specifically with my 9-year-old is that it has been a wonderful, safe space for him to practice working with other people, dealing with frustration, problem solving when he's upset, at something that's happened. And for the most part now anyway, when he is done playing that game, he's okay. Like he's all right. That's changed a little bit. Whereas my younger guy, who's 7, he's just turned 7 not long ago. It can be a little bit of a different experience for him, where I find like it is a bit too much for him, and he gets really, those big emotions are happening, and he gets off and he's frustrated and he's upset, and it kind of has put him in like a bad mood. And it's interesting to see the differences and how it might be impacting them. And I think some of it has to do with the different games that they're playing too, and just different personalities. But I'm very careful I'll say to my youngest sometimes, I wonder how you're going to feel after playing that game. I noticed last time you were really upset. And he does make the choice sometimes to play the game again anyway. And that's okay. Maybe that's his way of practicing dealing with whatever's frustrating with him in that game. And I'm very careful to not just be like, don't play that game anymore, because my goodness, you're grumpy when you get off. Because there's something in it that he's getting from it. Anyway, I'm rambling now and I forget what my main point was, so I'll stop.
No, I think that's good, Ashley, because I was thinking the other night, my guys were watching an NBA game. And so not gaming, like just watching. And they were on their feet. Like they were talking and walking in and out. And there were strong opinions about, you know, not against each other, just angry about various coaches or whatever. And it was a lot, like kind of like what you're saying. I was like, wow, this is really a lot. And then it was like, and then it's fine. Like it's over. And I got thinking to myself, like if this had been a video game, this is the stuff that people, so I also wonder if sometimes the gaming things get pinned on it that are actually true of lots of things where our adrenaline is rising. I mean, thinking about like hockey games and like even watching the adults at my nephew's hockey game. Wow. You know, like people are revved and but everyone's fine and shakes hands and goes home. So I think sometimes we see this emotion that, you know, even just taking that time to figure out, are we triggered in some way? Are we uncomfortable with it? And the difference between people expressing emotion and maybe kids getting in physical fights where someone's getting hurt, like that's a whole other level as well. So I think it's another one of those areas. Yeah, we just kind of watch and we see and we communicate, and not a right or wrong answer to it. It's so individual, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to add the piece about the emotions. You know, we had that with Chutes and Ladders, and we had that with Uno. Those big feelings of like, I can't believe I lost again. But what I think can happen with all experiences when emotions are high is that the children learn what they can and can't get away with other kids. And that creates a very good feedback loop of this is appropriate and this is not. Or I can go here with this person, but this person says, no, thank you, I'm off the game. And, you know, these are great learning experiences that, like you said, can be done safely in the confines of your own home so that then they can translate out into the bigger world. And the more that the kids have those opportunities to have their big feelings, the more they realize where they need to curb it or maybe where they need to tamp down a little bit. So if we're always worried about the big feelings, then they never really get to practice them. And I want them to practice them as much as possible in various different activities and environments. So gaming can definitely do that. It can bring it all out.
And if I can quickly add too, I'm just thinking, I actually started playing a game, Roblox Bed Wars is a favorite with my two. And that's one that I've started playing with them just a little bit. I don't really know what I'm doing, but they like that I'm in the game and I'm trying, and they love that they're teaching me. But it was my own experience of playing that specific game where, you know, you spend a lot of energy in that game, like, I don't know, gaining inventory and like doing quite a bit of work. And then like you can fall into the void and lose it all. And I was experiencing by playing this, those big emotions. So experiencing that firsthand, because I joined them in that game, it made it less likely for me to observe them playing and having those big emotions in that game and kind of being like, thinking things like, oh, you can't handle that game, or you're getting way too upset for a game, because I've experienced it myself. It was probably still different because I'm an adult. But it's not like I was playing that game, having those feelings and, you know, and maybe I would say things like out loud to be like, oh, that was so frustrating. But okay, it is just a game, but not in a brushing it off sort of way. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I joined them, I was able to be like, well, I can understand better now why I'm seeing those big emotions when you play that game and games like that.
Yeah, that, you know what, that reminds me, and Missy, your point too, so much so, someone that we know, like a family friend that we're close to, and their son had been going through a period of time, I don't know, maybe 11 or 12 years old, and he was just having a lot of trouble. Like if things didn't go well at a golf game, you know, the golf club would get fired off or whatever, and a lot of trouble with frustration and competition. And this had been a source of, like, it was a difficult time in a lot of different ways with a lot of different sports. And interestingly, he got really engaged in online gaming, and this was a concern that the mom shared with me. But what ended up happening was he went to join in one day, and a couple of his friends said, we actually don't want you on our team because it's just too intense for what we're trying to do. And we're not that keen on how competitive you're getting and the language you're using and whatever. And that was the game changer, not his parents kind of trying to work through everything. It was that natural experience of recognizing that he wasn't going to be able to engage in the type of gameplay he wanted if he didn't figure things out in a different way. And he might have been able to find a team that didn't care. And that would have been fine too. Like maybe they would have been intense and whatever, but these were a couple of buddies from school. He wanted to be able to play with them. And so it really was kind of just letting that play out until some of those natural consequences took place. Now, I think it was still good that his parents, it wasn't the first time he'd heard it, because I do think our kids want to know what social expectations could possibly be out there. I don't think it makes sense to just never mention, if something's feeling off, but it really didn't have the same effectiveness, until it affected his gameplay. So it's definitely an opportunity to play with all those limits, both your own limits and socially. Right. So it's, yeah. I wondered if we wanted to talk, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts. I don't really know what my thoughts are on young kids and I'm going to say screens, because not just gaming, but even just TV. Now we have the capacity, kids riding in cars, can have movies playing, you can go out for dinner and give your toddler your phone. There's so many times that kids can have screens now. And that is a little bit different from when my kids were little. Like we did have some screens, but not to the degree that people have access to now. So I wonder a little bit, when we're talking a lot about these benefits to having, a fair bit of freedom and a fair bit of agency, do we feel like there's an age that starts? Do we feel like in toddlerhood, that's a good idea? I'll just read a little piece from, just see if I can find it here. So this is from Sue Elvis, and she had written a blog post called Younger Unschoolers, What About Technology and Screen Time? And I'm always conscious a little bit because I'm reading these pieces out of context. So if you know Sue's writing, you know that she really advocates for relationship and not just arbitrary rules. So she was doing some of her own reflection. And she was talking about, I think, the era that her kids grew up in as well. And so, fewer screens. So yes, they had a TV, and then eventually I think they had a computer, but a lot of the time was spent outside. So she was kind of pondering this maybe from the same perspective that I have been. So she says, could young kids first need to experience the real world before they head out into the virtual one? Could it be important for them to do real things with real people? Feel, smell, taste, touch, see, talk. Build connections with the people in their family and share life with them. So again, I'll link the fuller conversation about that. But that is something that I think about and I wonder about, because I do think that so much of young children, their learning is tactile and tradition, storytelling and books and conversation and, outdoor time, getting a chance to see grow. Now, at that time, I remember this blog post and I had commented back to Sue. I don't disagree with that, but I had just added another piece that for my family, especially one of my kids who watched a lot of TV was a springboard to a lot of other things. So TV was very rarely passive for him. It was, he'd get inspired by characters and then he'd be grabbing materials to kind of build his own version of it. Or he would watch an episode of something and then I would see it coming out in his pretend play later that day. He's creating his own world, My husband watched a lot of NASCAR, and so he would spend all this time setting up all his my son, not my husband, would spend all this time setting up his cars and then recreating a race. And he'd make up dances to a lot of the music. He loved music. So I felt like for us, children's TV actually was a very rich experience for him because it was just kind of part of his world. And, if we were at the library and we saw a book that was related to a character, one of the shows, that was just so exciting too. So anyway, it was all good. Sue and I had this conversation and we kind of agreed that I think it's both true. But it's probably just being cognizant of how are we thinking about those quote screens? Are they for us? Are they for the kids? Again, are we engaging with them in things? So a lot of the dances that my son knew, for example, I also knew the routine. we would be part of things together. Or if I wasn't part of things, I would at least be facilitating that. I can remember him getting into the Land Line was a big dinosaur series. And so he would want to be getting cereal out to create all this food for the herbivores. And so part of that for me was just observing that and making that available. Sure, we can use some of the cereal for, whatever, and kind of being ready for those pieces. But yeah, I don't know. I wondered if anybody else had anything to add to that. I mean, Ashley, not to put you on the spot, your youngest guy at least is not that far from those preschool ages.
Yeah, I don't disagree with it either. I think I see, like what you're saying, both things are true. There's definitely value in being in the real world with people in real time. And I don't that my guys certainly do that within our family, within our extended family, when we go to the library, when we go to the force group that we've been visiting. And I think it continues to be true across ages, and maybe it changes time, the amount of time doing that might change. And there's so much to factor in. But one thing that came to mind when I read that quote and what you were just sharing, Erin, and thinking about my children specifically, both of them, it's always easier to speak to my older one because I've just had more time with him, so more experience. But I think sometimes real life experiences can be hard for some people. And you hear people who are neurodivergent of all ages talk about being out in the real world. So I was thinking about, Erin, you mentioned how sometimes now families can bring things like screens to a restaurant when they're going out for a dinner or something. And you'll see a 5-year-old with a tablet in front of them and they're watching whatever they're watching or playing a game or something. And I know there's been talk about the judgment that you feel when, you're bringing a screen to a restaurant or something. But I can think about my oldest son and even my youngest son at times. And sometimes sitting in that restaurant, and we don't do it a lot because it's not something that they always want to do, but sometimes that real life experience of being in the restaurant is not comfortable for them. My oldest has different sensory processing differences and smell. So in a restaurant, right? The different smells that he takes in, he's very sensitive to. The noise level and all the different things that are going on, the lighting sometimes can just be too much for him. So for him to come and join us at a restaurant for a meal, sometimes, he doesn't all the time, but sometimes he'll bring his tablet is usually the thing that he brings, or he might borrow one of our phones and play Pokemon Go. But it allows him access to that experience with us, even if it's not in the way, he's doing something else still. He's still there with us. He's still part of the family. So that's just one example. But I just even think about kids who are younger, and you hear parents talk about what if they just want to sit at home some days and watch YouTube all day? And I just think about how, sure, if my two were never wanting to go out over to the park or to go play with friends or to go to the library with me, and they stopped doing the things that they used to want to do and just be at home, then I'd be okay, what is going on? Missy, what you were saying earlier, right? There's maybe something deeper going on. We need to explore that a little bit further. But for the most part, most days, if I say, do you want to go out into the real world, to, not grocery shopping, I'm not saying that, right? But something that they typically enjoy, they'll put the screen down to come do that. I just kind of wanted to talk about that because that's kind of our experience in recognizing. And I think what I want to say too is that so my oldest is 9, and when he was like 3, 4, 5, going back to the restaurant example, we didn't do that much because he wasn't one to sit still in a restaurant. So we just didn't do that too much. And we wouldn't have felt comfortable at that time to bring a screen because we would have thought, well, that's maybe not the right thing to do. And, we would just be worried about that. So we just didn't do it. But now I can really see how screens can provide, I don't know, like a comfort, I guess, and just allow our children to access other things at different times, and just recognizing that just because I experience something a certain way doesn't mean that my children are the exact same and experience that way. I don't know. I'm not making much sense right now, but I was just thinking about how we are all different, and I'm starting to hear more about from the neurodivergent community, specifically about how screens are such a important, valuable tool for them to have at home, but also out in the real world too. I guess that's kind of what I was wanting to point out.
I think you made absolute sense, Ashley. Yeah, what you said was great. I was thinking as well, though, about sometimes when we think about what our children are doing, often we have higher expectations of them perhaps than we do of ourselves. And I think sometimes it's kind of good for us to think about, if our kids are using screens a lot, then maybe it's good for us to think about whether we're using screens a lot, because we do, especially with our little kids, we get to set the tone in our house, and we get, and if we're a person that they want to be around and they want to be like, then they're going to emulate what we do. And we've already said, haven't we, about how the range of things that you can do on screens and the amazing technology that's available to us now at a much cheaper cost than in the past, and is so much more portable. We do use it a lot. And I know lots of us are thinking about that, aren't we? Lots of us are thinking about how we manage our own screen time. So it seems a bit unfair sometimes for us to put a lot of more higher expectations on our kids perhaps than maybe on ourselves in a weird sort of way. And I also think one of the things for me that's really important with my kids, I think, has been, it made me think about kind of transitioning to a vegan diet, which a lot of us have done in this house. And I think there's something to be said for putting more in before you take stuff out, if that makes sense, rather than thinking about restricting things. Maybe it's good sometimes to think about what more can we bring, the more things that lead us to connection and joy, and things that, more, not only the things like with older children learning more about what they're playing, but just finding more ways to connect with our kids rather than trying to prevent them from doing other things. I don't know if that makes sense. If that makes sense. Again, my beeping has gone off now. Put me off. It's bad timing, that.
No, that makes total sense. And Ashley, I just want to piggyback a little bit from what you said there, because that was on my mind earlier and I'd forgotten about that. Because I think when we're talking about neurodivergence, on the one hand, so I'm a little bit muddled in this. So I work in the field of disability and neurodivergence, and I'm muddled because people are even using different language. Like some of my families want to use some language, younger families want to use other language. So I'm just going to do my best here. So I remember going to some workshops, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and there was a lot of warning about gaming and even just screen use and phone use in general for people with autism or who had ADHD. Again, I want to be careful because some of the families I work with, it's important to use person first language, and others are offended by that. So I'm just going to go with the language that I was kind of the families that I was working on behalf of. So this, I remember a couple workshops in particular. It was really, really, a big part of the workshop was this concern about screens and technology. And there was a young man who I was there with, and I remember him saying to me, like, this is not my experience. Like, this is not how I feel about screens and about gaming, I think was a big piece of it. And so similar to what you're saying, Ashley, I think it can go either way. And again, I think this is very individualized, but I know for one of my sons, the TV piece and the gaming piece was a game changer, actually. It was a tool that actually changed our life. Like I can actually think of our days pre-game system and post. And it really did change the way that our days went. And, I hate to simplify it this way, but it's worked out fine. How did they turn out? But it's worked out fine, right? Over time, that was modified as made sense. Other things became more interesting. He actually games the least of everybody in the family now. But for that period of time, there were things happening that sometimes he needed a lot of extra stimulation, and other times he needed distraction from what was happening externally. That being said, I don't think that the presenter was all wrong either. I think he made some really good points. And so again, it just goes back to really tuning in, not only to what makes sense to us in our family culture, but even the individuals within that family culture. So if I think about that when my kids were little, we probably did end up using more technology at that particular age than I would have imagined us using, but it was just a really good tool. And I also think that we had so many other pieces of our lives, so many stories, so many, exploring outside, so many games. It was just one piece. So I do agree that a lot of those tactile experiences and, outdoor experiences are important. I don't think they need to be one or the other. I think they can be integrated into family life. And I think we've seen that a little bit. There's a bit of a polarity. It's outdoor time or it's screen time. And in fact, it doesn't need to be quite that, one or the other. Does anybody, sorry, Missy, were you?
All I wanted to say was it's hard to have my kids didn't have to experience the screen world per se when they were younger. So I don't really have any insight on our particular experience there other than television. We had TV. We also had the ability to record TV with TiVo. Does anybody remember TiVo? To the point where when we were in a car one time and we were driving by, some geese flew over and I pointed it out to my son and he was like, rewind it. Because he was so used to being able to rewind when we recorded shows on TiVo. So that always stood out. A very funny story there. But my gut tells me little babies and toddlers need the real world, and they need real human beings to touch them, and they need to sit in laps and read books and snuggle, and and they need to feel their bare feet on the ground and that sort of thing. So that's kind of where I lean towards. But the funny thing is my kids now, when they see kids on screens, like little ones in the store and stuff, they're like, wow. And then they're like, I'm glad I didn't have that. So I don't know where they're getting that. I don't know if that's a gut feeling that they're having, a gut reaction that they're having, or, what it is about their personal experiences that call them or allow them to make them think that. So it's just kind of something I'm working through too. I have cousins who have younger children, and some of them try their best to kind of use their phones without including their kids on that. So it's again about, like you were saying, Haley, like setting the example. And then I really appreciate the work. I found a book that when we were talking, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, Evolution and the Challenges of Modern Life. And one of the things that they say in there that I kind of appreciated was just that humans need alive creatures to give them real-time feedback. And when we don't have that from the screens, it kind of can affect sort of the development of what it means to be a human in the context of other humans. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where I guess sometimes I wonder what that does developmentally to the littles, you know, like babies and toddlers and stuff. So it's just a question mark. I don't have the answers. It's more of a, maybe we'll see one day.
Yeah. And I agree with that, Missy. And I feel like babies and toddlers, I think they will seek that out too. Right. So I think it's so much about responsiveness of the parents, because I think babies and toddlers will seek out those experiences when you look at how much they want to explore, how much they want to connect with us. Yes. So if they are getting really tied in with screens as a preference, it kind of makes me think it's maybe parent driven rather than
environment. Yeah.
I don't know what you all have time-wise. I only have about 10 minutes left, but I wondered, I don't know if that's enough time. I wondered about talking about social media a little bit. I don't know if we can do that in 10 or 15 minutes. And just this idea of, I know Dr. Gabor Mate has done quite a bit on, and actually Gordon Newfield, I think probably quite a few of you are familiar with his work as well. And this idea around kind of being peer attached rather than attached with elders, or sort of that more natural structure. And so I just have a piece here from Dr. Mate that says the most significant change in recent times has been the technology of communication. From the phone, first the phone, then the internet through email and instant messaging. We are enamored of communication technology without being aware that one of its primary functions is to facilitate attachments. We have unwittingly put it into the hands of children who, of course, are using it to connect with their peers. Because of their strong attachment needs, the contact is highly addictive, often becoming a major preoccupation. Our culture has not been able to evolve the customs and traditions to contain this development, and so again, we are left to our own devices. So I appreciate that, and I think I'm interested in the whole idea, screens aside, of this kind of extreme peer attachment that I think can happen, and maybe the dwindling away in some cases of this attachment with other generations within our family systems, whether that's the parent or extended family. So my thinking around social media is a little bit interesting, I think, because I've seen, we did have some struggles with one of our kids that we needed to really figure some pieces out. And I guess my thinking is with it, though, a lot of the things that have always happened, we're seeing happen through social media. So, for example, if some of that, kind of bullying and conflict had been happening on a playground or at an arena or at my house with a group of people, I would also have involved myself. So I think so much of what's probably always happened with human nature is now playing out on social media. And I think, but it's like the stakes are higher. There's a permanency to social media. There's, you're not right there. So there's maybe a little more bravery that happens in terms of what people say. But I guess what I think about this is it's actually a bigger issue than just screens or just social media. And I think sometimes it gets tagged and all lumped together. Whereas I can think of a lot of situations where my kids have really had real positives come from social media. Mm-hmm. So again, I think it's a tool that we have to be connected with our kids around. And I also think that context has so much to do with it. So if we're looking at kids who are only with peers all day at school, and let's just face it, it's not just those hours. It's the most kids are they're either on a bus or they're walking for that hour before school or 45 minutes. Then there's after school time. Then there's teams, potentially team sports. Kids at the high school level are with peers a really long time. And I think for myself, I found these teen years they've required so much of me, and I wanted to be there for them. But I never would have realized that before parenting. I kind of thought the teen years were, they were what they were, but they weren't going to require this much of me. But I think, especially proactively, but sometimes reactively as well, I've really needed to be there, to be available, to be present, to be mindful and learning myself. So when I think about quotes like that, I don't disagree with them, but I also think there's a little bit of a different context when we're talking about either home education or even families that are really well connected. So we didn't have much time and I talked and talked, so I'll stop now. Yeah. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that, or even how it feels for themselves with social media?
Well, I agree with you. I think there is such a difference between what's the normal course of a child's day, and then how does social media play into that, or how is social media utilized? And so if they're immersed in peer culture the majority of the time, then they're going to want to stay tapped into peer culture when they're not physically there. So it just begs the question. It goes back to the earlier years and establishing that foundation and strengthening those attachments and those bonds with the family unit for me. And then they know that they can be out and then come back and be out and come back. And there's still an emotional foundation that was created that gives them, I think, resiliency and an awareness that they might not have otherwise if that was not created. So instead of being easily swayed or frustrated or getting involved in particular things that happen online, they might be able to have that perspective where they can step back and look at it from that bird's eye view versus getting really, really pulled into particular issues or problems. This is a big conversation. It definitely, it's a big one because there's so much psychology to it. And it also is so independent. It's so dependent on the individual and where they are in their lives, developmentally, socially, economically. There's a lot of pieces to it. And I also think when we talk about it as our own family, we have to remember that we're doing it as a research number of like 2 or 4, or however many people are in our family. So there's the individual experience side, and then there's the aggregate of all the people participating in a study, if you will. But yeah, I do think attachment is huge. If you have a strong attachment to your kids, I don't feel like they're going to go looking for anything else because they don't have a void to fill. Yeah.
No, I love that, Missy, because I think that, and that's what I saw, especially when my kids were engaged online with kids who maybe didn't have as strong of an attachment. At first, it can feel really exciting. It's kind of like, oh, there's like a whole world out here. And so I think there can be that piece to it that can be like, for me, it was quite uncomfortable. But I did see them able to pull back. Sometimes it took longer than what I was comfortable with, but they did kind of hearken back to the connection and the values and kind of that anchoring that they had grown up with. Whereas I think that was not the case for some of the other kids. And in fact, you see adults that go right off the rails on social media. Right? I mean, it's not really just social media can be very problematic for all age groups, but I think it's so heightened in those teen years because it's an intense time, and our society makes it even more, I don't know, of a battleground, I think. So you've already got an intense period of development, and then you've kind of got this this situation created by society that actually sometimes pits kids against each other. Yeah. So I tend to think sometimes it's a whole like adolescent conversation, and then the social media thing comes in and kind of gets attached to it. And yes, it can be problematic, but I think there have been issues in the adolescent with the way we do the high school years even prior. So yeah. Ashley or Haley, do you have anything to add to that piece? We've got a couple more minutes. We're good.
Well, I know this is massive and I don't want to go off on a bit of a whole other thing, but I think, yeah, that it just shows how important that relationship piece is, really. And I think when it comes to things that we're scared about, and I think there can be a lot of sadness as well if we're thinking about, if we're feeling that our children are pulling away from us, and maybe they're getting immersed in things like social media or gaming, that is taking time away from our relationship, and maybe we feel that we don't know a lot about it. There's all kinds of feelings that come up for us, and I know that sometimes that temptation then to ratchet up the kind of control and maybe even things like punishment, those, you can understand why those things feel necessary to people. But those things are the things that are not going to help us strengthen those relationships. Those are things that are definitely going to damage that relationship even more, which is then going to leave us feeling even more scared and more sad, and on both sides perhaps less connected. And that's just a downward spiral of not good stuff. And yeah, we're going to finish. So it feels awful to end on that, because we're not talking about the things that we can do. And I think there are so many brilliant things that we can do to build those relationships. But I guess it's just it's just remembering that if we put those relationships first, then that's going to put us in a lot better stead than thinking, how can we stop that other thing? And I guess going back to what I said before, for me, when I've had those times with my children, I've tried to think, how can I bring more connection? How can I reach out to them more, rather than thinking, how can I stop that bad stuff? How can I just bring more good stuff into our lives? Because that then naturally crowds out bad stuff. I'm doing the air quotes now. Yeah.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And it kind of, it really does kind of circle back to the beginning, I think, of our conversation around just staying connected and partnering. And I think probably if there's any sort of area of screens that it's helpful for our kids to know, we're not quite sure, we're wondering, like, I can't remember the wording Missy used at the beginning, but it was like, it's not a quick yes or a quick no. It's, I need to think about this a little bit. I think this is one of them. Right? It just makes total sense for us to be thinking about this, especially even from like a privacy information perspective. Like, I think if we can partner with our kids, that it's not about like, I don't want you to connect with these friends, or if we can just talk about the challenge of how quickly technology has changed, and we're all kind of trying to figure it out together, it feels a little bit less, you want this, I don't want this. It's just a little more true to the fact that we're all kind of figuring this out together. So.
Yeah. And if I can just add, with everything you guys just said, I agree so much. I think sometimes as parents, it can feel like we need to figure something out quickly. So in just listening to you guys talk about doing all of those wonderful things when whether your kids are young and you feel like they're spending too much time on screens or spending too much time in the social media world, is taking a breath and realizing, I don't need to figure this out right now, because I think then you're less likely to, make rash decisions. But just remember that we've got time together to figure this out. It doesn't have to be something that, as the parent, you have to take on this responsibility of, oh my gosh, like where have we gotten to? But just taking a breath and realizing, okay, we have time, and we can just slow down, and whatever that length of time would be, but that we don't need to panic necessarily. I think in most situations anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Ashley. And I think just to add to that too, that and there's not a right or a wrong to it. If you have two different kids, you know, there's so much pressure from different sides, delay this, don't, you know, whatever. You can make different decisions for different children. And I think when you have that relationship within the family, I think even the kids get that. That's what I've noticed. They see it's not about being equal. It's about being individual and caring and kind of navigating that based on the person. Right. So, okay. I feel like we could have talked a whole bunch more, but we did cover quite a bit of ground. I think I really enjoyed this today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your perspective. So Missy, I'm going to link the pieces where people can connect with you as far as your website and your podcast. I will link that, as well as quite a few of these different, you know, kind of posts and articles we've talked about. Just gives a broader view than what we have time to talk about. So, okay. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. It was so good to see everybody. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks, Missy.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us.
And this ends our conversation today. We hope you found it interesting and maybe helpful. If you'd like to connect further or see additional content, Haley can be found on the web and on Instagram at Taking a Kinder Path. Erin can be found at Everlearning. And I, Ashley, can be found on Instagram at AshleyAsMama and at Storytime Shelves. We'd be very grateful if you'd share this conversation with anyone you think might appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.